Stewart Rhodes, now a victor. The DOJ moved Tuesday to wipe out the seditious conspiracy convictions for the leaders of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers who were found guilty. The DOJ just said, why? What gives? We'll just move to vacate and dismiss the entire case. We don't even need to deal with this anymore. Tarrio was sentenced to 22 years, many others 18 years, 17 years, 15 years, and more. Insane charges and insane sentences, and they have indicated that they do not oppose this motion. Nice. That dismissal of this criminal case is in the interests of justice.
Was weaponize the federal government against Trump and his supporters.
It's up there.
Dude, bar none. That's the worst thing that Joe Biden did. Mark my words, they will try to indict President Donald J. Trump when Democrats take power again and put him in prison for the rest of his life.
I agree with that. Proud Boys and Oath Keepers now securing another victory at last from the DOJ. They submitted a motion here to dismiss and vacate the convictions with prejudice in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Of course, this is the Ethan Nordine case. We've covered the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers for years here. They were the main victims of the Biden DOJ's attack on them. They needed to get people convicted of seditious conspiracy so that they could then parlay that into an attack on President Trump. Trump was, according to them, enabling these groups on his behest to go and interfere with the peaceful transfer of power, which is what they said repeatedly for years. And as we saw, some of these people were not even there at the time. Now, this is a new motion that just dropped. We'll take a look at it. Here's some background from Politico. That's Stewart Rhodes, one of the Oath Keepers. We also saw that guys like Ray Epps, the guy who was there screaming into the Capitol, and presumably was not stopped at all by any of Kash Patel's, what he says are still 250 FBI agents who were still located in the FBI working there still. They were supposed to be there to prevent and enable riot control, which is interesting because we don't remember seeing any FBI agents in official gear showing their badges, going up to guys like Ray Epps. And Ray Epps, by the way, was a former Oath Keeper who got a sweetheart plea deal and was able to enter a change of plea back in a Zoom meeting, just called into court. Didn't have to come back to DC or anything because he knew that people would be following him around and asking him some pretty hard questions. So the FBI didn't prevent really anything as far as we can tell. In fact, it seems like it's the opposite. They enabled it. They encouraged it. They dressed as plainclothes officers, and a lot of them still have not been identified. People pulling window sills down, people who were setting up the gallows. Still have a lot of questions about who those people are, including who the pipe bomber was. But Stewart Rhodes, now a victor. The DOJ moved Tuesday to wipe out the seditious conspiracy convictions for the leaders of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers who were found guilty by a DC jury in rigged trials. Remember, during the Proud Boys case, we covered that extensively here. They had identified 50 federal agents from the defense perspective when there was only 5 or 6 Proud Boys who were ultimately on trial. One of them, I think, bailed out and started to plead guilty and turned state witness to save his butt. But they were not allowed to introduce that evidence because those were Homeland Security agents, not FBI agents. And those Homeland agents were just not relevant to the matter at hand. So the judge precluded all of that evidence from coming in. Trump pardoned a bunch of these people, all the J6ers, but commuted only some of the sentences. Now the commutations are going to evaporate, not be necessary because the convictions had remained on the books. Their cases were moving through the Court of Appeals. There were deadlines coming up. The DOJ needed to respond to their appellate motions and memorandum. And now the DOJ just said, why? What gives? We'll just move to vacate and dismiss the entire case. We don't even need to deal with this anymore. So now the decision is going to erase the scam of the J6 setup. Trump pardoned more than 1,000 members of the mob on his first day. The U.S. has determined, we'll read the motion, saying that the commutations are a basis of the move. And the same thing was happening with Bannon. And I believe Peter Navarro was coming down the line too. Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio was convicted, but he wasn't even there at the time. Trump pardoned him. Tarrio has long advocated for Trump to pardon the others, Nordine, Biggs, Real, and Dominic Pizzola, who was convicted of seditious conspiracy. And we listened to a bunch of them saying, even during testimony at trial, that they were not organizing a seditious conspiracy at all. They couldn't even get together and run a hamburger stand, I think was their analogy that they said. We're not organized, we're just there. And they were there in response to the Antifa goons who were all there doing the same thing that they did back during the Summer of Love with George Floyd. The same thing that they're doing now in Minnesota, attacking ICE officers, attacking federal agents. Maybe they were there in plain clothes or in Trump gear, who were also causing a lot of the mayhem. Tarrio was sentenced to 22 years, many others 18 years, 17 years, 15 years, and more. Insane charges and insane sentences. Trump didn't pardon them all, but now doesn't matter. And one Oath Keeper, Kelly Meggs, says, since we were all innocent, this nightmare may finally be coming to an end. And another devastating blow for the J6 hoaxers for whom this was their entire life. These sedition hunters and all these people who spent their entire days just screaming and shouting about insurrection every single day. It was insane. So now the motion has been submitted, and it is now being signed by Daniel J. Laniers, Assistant U.S. Attorney. Coming down, it said, this is a consolidated appeal involving 4 defendants convicted of crimes related to J6, Ethan Nordine, Joseph Biggs, Zachary Real, and Dominic Pizzola. And we believe, I think if we remember right, Dominic Pizzola testified back during the Proud Boys trial and was like a national hero, that guy, explaining, he took the stand and explained everything. The briefing schedule in this case is currently suspended. The government now respectfully requests that before the defendants are required to file their opening brief, the court vacate their convictions under U.S. Code. We don't need to appeal this. Remand this back down to the district court. The appeal is not necessary. So once it goes back down to the DC District Court, then we're going to move to dismiss the indictment with prejudice under the rules of criminal procedure. And we're allowed to do this. The Supreme Court has recognized that appellate courts have authority to vacate the district court's judgment and remand to allow the government to dismiss the indictment. The court grounded its authority to vacate a judgment in the U.S. Code. And so we've contacted the lawyers. The U.S. attorney, assistant attorney down below, contacted the lawyers for each of the defendants and Mr. Real, who is representing himself, and they have indicated that they do not oppose this motion. Nice. Vacatur of the defendant's convictions is just under the circumstances because the United States has determined in its prosecutorial discretion that dismissal of this criminal case is in the interests of justice. Citing other cases, saying, these are all decisions that are within prosecutorial discretion. We can make a decision to do this, and that's exactly what we're doing. Remember, on January 20th, Trump commuted the defendant's sentences. He said time served as of January 20, 2025. And the seditious conspirators, they did not ultimately get the full pardon. Enrique Tarrio did, I think, because he was not even there. He was in, I think, Boston or Baltimore, Then in the executive branch's view, since Trump said that the convictions, or the sentences rather, have been commuted, it is not in the interest of justice to continue to prosecute this or the cases of other similarly situated defendants. The United States is thus also filing similar motions in other appeals, in this one called Minuta and Harrelson. Now, the government's motion to vacate in this case is consistent with its practice of moving the Supreme Court to vacate convictions in cases where the government has decided in its prosecutorial discretion that dismissal of a criminal case is in the interests of justice. Motions that the Supreme Court routinely grants. Look at all these ones where they've done that. Rinaldi, Petit, Watts, Blucher, Bronzonian. We got Bannon and others. So now the United States respectfully requests that the court vacate the defendant's convictions and remand to the district court so that the government may move to dismiss the indictment with prejudice under Rule 48A. Signed by Daniel Laniers and submitted to the United States Court of Appeals out of D.C. So big win. A lot of caterwauling about this out there. And so here's Enrique Tarrio talking a little bit more about these cases.
She would have fought vigorously in court for him. So why the double standard?
And now you have Jeanine Pirro in there literally putting her signature on a piece of paper that's basically saying that everything that Merrick Garland did was good, that everything that the Biden regime did in their corrupt Department of Injustice, as we called it, and maybe it still is, was completely upside down. So she's saying that that's okay now.
I counter that this was the government's flagship, our case was the government's flagship case.
That's right.
When it came to January 6th. It was the longest trial, the most popular trial, and the most consequential trial of J6. Actually, the most expensive trial in United States history. So to say that she doesn't know about this motion, it's possible. But I also think it's unlikely that this didn't have to go through her in some way. Now one can question, did Jocelyn Valentine lie to her and tell her the circumstances?
She's still there.
Case? I don't know.
She's prosecuting the pipe bomber.
Only thing I know is that.
Interrupt you, but to understand the circumstances of the Proud Boys trial is a lot because it was so unprecedented. A lot of the novel legal theories that they brought forward, like the tools theory, like so many confidential human sources that they tried to actually smear that the government did this to their own confidential human sources that said that the Proud Boys did nothing wrong. So there's just so many intricacies to this case. It was months long. How can we bring Jeanine Pirro up to speed on this case? How can we get her attention? How can we maybe make her understand that her signature should not be on that motion and that Jocelyn Valentine is potentially deceiving her if she doesn't already know, that is.
Get that there's a million things happening in the world. I understand that completely. And I think, I don't want to be number one in the priority list. I don't expect to be number one on the priority list. But when it came down to the 4 years of Joe Biden, the number one most egregious and evil thing that Joe Biden did wasn't tank the economy, surge the price of milk, eggs, and all of that. Wasn't his inaction in foreign policy. Those things are horrible.
And
the
the
worst
invasion.
thing that the Biden administration did was weaponize the federal government against Trump and his supporters.
It's up there.
There, bar none. That's the worst thing that Joe Biden did, and there's no accountability for that. And I don't look at this point. I'm so blackpilled that I practically know that the people who did this, people like Jocelyn Ballantyne and Special Agent Nicole Miller, they're not going to go see a day in jail time.
No.
Okay, so at least tell us she doesn't even have to respond to our let the judge be the judge. But if we don't get accountability for this, we're in the next 4 years, we don't know if a Democrat's going to steal the election again, and it's going to be weaponized not just against me, but the viewers that are watching this, yourself included.
Yeah.
You're a threat.
Yep.
And think I'm lying. Think I'm exaggerating for a second.
No, you're not. We lived through it.
But then get in a time machine and put yourself back from 2021 all the way to
We have fresh memories on it.
Just sit in there and remember everything that happened, everything that we fought for, and it'll all be for nothing. All be for nothing. So my main priority right now is get these pardons in and get restitution for all the J6ers and their families, not just the 1,600 of them, but the families and the advocates that are included, because they are going to be a target. Mark my words, they will try to indict, maybe at a state level, they will try to indict President Donald J. Trump when Democrats take power again and put him in prison for the rest of his life.
I agree with that.
Think that I am exaggerating for 1 second, and you're going to be sorely, sorely mistaken.
But we're happy to see this development. And I agree with Enrique Tarrio. If Trump thinks that, they're going to let bygones be bygones, I don't think he thinks that. But if that is the perspective coming out of this administration, I think that they're going to just ratchet it up with the Epstein files, with the Iran war, you name it. They don't even need any evidence. They just make it up. They've done that 4 times in criminal cases, 5 with the E. Jean Carroll case. And then it just trickles down from there. So if you're in the blast zone, they take you out. They went after all the alternate electors in multiple states, multiple indictments across the board. And so this is why the Justice Department, a proper AG, and actual accountability for the people who've done this is one of the highest priorities, I think, of the administration needs to be, or else there's going to be blowback that comes in the aftermath. But this is a good development. We're happy to see at least some semblance of justice coming down now that the DOJ is agreeing to dismiss the cases against all of them. That is good news, and we're happy to see it. Hopefully, much more to come.